Morning, guys. It's our time of the year, eh? With deer hunting just around the corner, and for many of you, you're deer hunting already. But it is exciting. You know, a lot of you guys haven't ordered your book yet. And you know you're going to. The more you think about it, the more you realize that I gotta have that book. And so, get your book soon. Even if you don't have the time to read it before you go to deer camp this year, take it along anyway, because you might have some kind of confusing thing going on out there in your hunting area, and you can look it up in your book. And this book will cover just about any kind of situation you're going to run into while hunting whitetails, and clear it up for you. It might make the difference between getting a nice buck this year or nothing, or maybe settling for some smaller deer or antlerless deer, whatever. But no, it's not too late to buy your book, and we get them out to you right away. So even while I'm deer hunting, books will be shipped. We've got that all set up already. Now, so make sure you get it soon, and you get an autographed copy right away or soon, and you don't want to miss having this book in your home this year or in your deer camp. So, yeah, and like I said, you know you're going to buy it. You know, if you've been watching my seminar, you know you just got to have this book in your library, or even if it's your only hunting book you ever bought. This book is going to pay for itself many, many times, many deer seasons in the future. So get busy, you guys. Get your book. Now, today I have a new subject for you. Maybe 2 or 3 new subjects. We'll see how it goes here. This one is entitled, "What Big Bucks Are Doing Right Now." You know, I've been doing this ever since bucks shed velvet, around the 1st September. And it's been a popular hunting seminar. So we're going to cover what bucks are doing right now. Today it's October 27th. Today it's October 27th. And so from this point on, from today on, in your hunting area, the next 30 days, well, say 3 weeks at least, the next 3 weeks are the most important 3 weeks in a white-tailed buck's life. And the buck that's going to be really busy during those 3 weeks is the dominant breeding buck, the biggest buck living in the square mile area where you hunt. And so remember, the square mile doesn't mean it's square. It can be oblong or shaped like a snake, like in farm areas, with the buck's range consisting of woodlots and forested water courses and places like that. So it can be miles long and just a quarter mile in width. But anyway, this is what you're going to be looking at opening morning. Here's a typical square mile deer range where we hunt. And I've already showed you some of the things we find when we're going out there during our last scouting session, when we had all that snow. But wasn't that interesting? This year you're going to be looking at things like that, and it's going to make sense to you, and you're going to have a better idea what to do each day that you hunt this year, knowing what a typical square mile of a dominant buck's breeding range looks like. Or his breeding range is actually his home range, but it becomes both his home range and a breeding range. Well, it becomes it gets right down to it right now, beginning today or yesterday or tomorrow. But this is what's going to be happening in the next 3 weeks. Well, here's a typical square mile, like I said. And these areas outlined in black are doe ranges within this particular square mile. And there's 5 of them. And in that range, typically, I wish we had this many deer in a square mile where we're hunting. The wolves just won't let that happen for a while, but typically you'll find in a lot of them, sometimes there's only 4 in a square mile. It kind of depends on whether the area, all of the areas within that square mile are suitable whitetail habitat. There can be spots where it just isn't, like say a big, long, grassy swamp, wide open, or a farm field, or whatever. So it can kind of change the size, which way it goes, and that sort of thing. But here we got these 5 home ranges, and in that thing we'll have 5 mature does. One doe that's 2.5 years of age or older, and they can live quite a few more years than an average buck. They can live 10, at the most 14 years. But some of them might be does that have established their own home range for the first time. But within each one of these is a mature doe. Within this square mile home range of a dominant breeding buck, we have 5 doe ranges outlined in black. And the number of deer that are in there are approximately like this. In forest areas, in most areas in the United States where whitetails live, and probably even where blacktails live, and blacktails are much like whitetails. Blacktails along the Pacific coast. But anyway, here's a square mile, and within each range is a mature doe with young. So the young consist of, in this case, 3 yearling does. Generally half of fawns that are born every year are does and half are bucks. And so anyway, we got, within this range, 3 of them are does, 3 yearling does, and we have 5 fawns that could be either sex within this area. So that's typical. And in this area are living 4 mature bucks in that square mile. And one of them is the dominant breeding buck, or the big boss buck, who really owns this range. And I've marked his bedding area right here, and it's right overlooking a beaver pond. He's a little high spot here where you can see out over this, where this stream runs through the area, and you can see back this way and that way, and that pond as well. And then there's 3 yearling bucks in this range as well. Now, beginning on September 1st, when bucks shed their velvet, they started the process of creating a square mile buck pecking order. And usually one of the yearling bucks is at the very bottom, and the biggest, strongest, and most aggressive of those bucks is usually the dominant breeding buck. Now that can change from year to year, but in many cases, most dominant breeding bucks that we have known were dominant breeding bucks from age 4.5 through 6.5, 3 years in a row. They can be dominant breeding bucks, but you never know. There might be one of these lesser bucks living in the area that finally this year he's gotten to be as big as the current dominant breeding buck, or maybe even bigger. And those 2 bucks had to fight it out to determine which one is going to be the boss buck from that point on. And so this year, that buck, younger buck, might be the new dominant breeding buck of the area. And that means there's 2 big bucks in this area if that happens. There's the current dominant breeding buck. Normally he's the largest, but that one that got beaten, and he's still living in this area. You can have 2 really big bucks in the area because of them. And some of these other bucks, like 3.5-year-old you see a 3.5-year-old in the woods and he's an 8-pointer, and maybe he doesn't have the mass in his antlers that he will have in the next few years, but he'll still, some of those 3.5-year-olds look pretty darn good, pretty hard to pass up. And I imagine that we'll have, at the end of our season this coming year, probably at least 2 of them will be 3.5-year-old bucks. Mostly because we have so few deer in our area right now, about 6 per square mile, and so our deer populations are way down. And this year we know within the hunting area we have 3 really big ones, but they're the only 3, and that's in 6 square miles. So some of those square miles don't have super big bucks as dominant breeding bucks, but sounds confusing, doesn't it? I'll get away from that now. So now, when you total up the numbers here, we've got 20 deer living in this square mile. And in most forest areas around the United States, there are that many, and maybe a little bit more, because whitetails are overabundant in many states, almost every state where they live in certain areas. But anyway, that's a lot of deer in there. And you know, isn't that funny? You know, say you like to sneak around the woods, you know, and you can sneak around there for 2 days in a row and never see a deer. How could there be 20 deer in there? Well, they're there. If somehow every bit of the trees and foliage somehow disappeared, just like that, there'd be 20 deer standing all around in this square mile. And that should tell you something. But they're there. They're there. If you knew how to count them yourself, you would agree. Yeah, we got that many in our hunting area. Well, I've talked to you a lot about how you do that. Now, within this area, I have some trails marked in orange. You see them? All these trails are really important to this big boss buck that lives in the area. Now, this purple spot is where it beds, overlooking this area here, and I mentioned that already. Between September 1st, when all these bucks shed velvet, and now, these deer have, all the bucks living in this area here, there's 4 of them, 4 mature bucks, and 3 yearling bucks. That's 7 antlered bucks in that square mile. And that sounds like a lot of deer, but that's the way it is in most areas of suitable whitetail habitat. In this case, we have 7, 4 mature bucks and 3 yearling bucks. We got 7 antlered bucks in there. Now, from September 1st until now, these bucks have been jousting with one another. They've been battling with antlers engaged to determine which of them is the toughest buck of the bunch. The one who will end up being the dominant breeding buck, and the one who virtually owns this area here. This is his area, this whole square mile here. And until about now, that buck has been tolerating the presence of all these other bucks living in the area, including the yearling bucks. But now it's getting close to breeding time. In our area, the first breeding phase of the rut begins about November 3rd. Now, that might be true in this square mile, November 3rd, but in this square mile over here, it might not be true until the 4th or 5th, and in this one, it won't be earlier, but they don't, all those, only about 10 to 12% of does are on estrus on any one day, beginning on November 3rd. And some does will be a little later. If they were all in estrus on the same day, my goodness, that big dominant breeding buck wouldn't be able to take care of all these other all the breedable does, the mature does and the yearling does, in a single day. That would be terrible. So, but meanwhile, because it's getting close, and this buck has been around for a while, and he's expecting, and his testosterone have reached maximum level, making him particularly aggressive. And we're at the point now where he doesn't want any of those other antlered bucks living in his breeding area. So now he's looking for all these other bucks. And these orange trails all through this area are trails that he uses to locate those other bucks if they're still in the area. And if he finds any in that area beginning now, he's going to chase them out. He's going to charge them. He's going to, with his head down, boy, like he really means business. And all these other bucks have been beaten up by this guy several times during the previous month and a half. So they know that if this guy is coming at them like that, they better get out of here right now. And the other older bucks, the bucks that are 2.5 to 6.5 years of age, they realize this is for real now. If I'm caught within this guy's range now, I'm going to have big trouble with him, and I don't want that to happen. And most of the older bucks will be chased off range. You see these arrows, purple arrows, these are bucks have been chased off range in those directions. Starting a couple weeks ago now, it got cold enough within the area we hunt so that bucks started a frenzy of marking their prospective breeding ranges. Even yearling bucks were doing that. They were making no trespassing signs wherever they live within the area, usually in portions of this square mile, not the entire square mile, just portions of it, in overlapping ranges. And they started making antler rubs and ground scrapes where they thought that this will be their breeding range. Usually, like the yearling buck, he's only going to mark the range in which he lives, and he lives with his mother all through the yearling year. So you'll find his smaller ground scrapes and antler rubs where he lives. And the bigger bucks will have, some of the biggest bucks might live in half of that square mile, or even a little bigger, like a former dominant breeding buck that got beat. But they'll be making antler rubs and ground scrapes in each of those places. And like a dog marks his home range, your yard, with urine to tell other bucks, this is my range and you guys stay out of here. This is my range, my yard. I don't want you in my yard. Well, bucks do that to tell other bucks, I don't want any other bucks in my breeding range. That's kind of a genetic thing for them, all thinking that way in the beginning. So they're making marks on these different trails all through there. Now, the big dominant buck is doing that too. My goodness, over the square mile he might have 30 ground scrapes and as many antler rubs throughout this area. And his no trespassing signs are really impressive to all the other bucks. They have lots of tarsal musk on the ground scrape, and the ground scrape is bigger than those of most other deer, and overhanging branches you'll start to see them getting broke up branches over the ground scrape where the buck has rubbed scalp musk on overhanging branches that added odor to the area. And they add the same odor to all their antler rubs in the beginning. They don't necessarily keep renewing those, but some they do. They'll renew them. But they're on bigger diameter trees. And anyway, he's got them all over throughout this range. And those particular trails that he's been marking, we refer to quite often, us deer hunters, as a scrape trail. Those are scrape trails. Now, he doesn't mark every trail in that square mile, just the main ones within each doe range. You know, he doesn't want other bucks around his does. Those are his does now. And you other bucks got to stay out of those ranges where my does live. And those antler rubs and ground scrapes are made to keep other bucks out of doe ranges. Now, just certain trails within there. They're usually well-used deer trails, the deer trails that were made and kept worn-looking by the doe and their young within the range, traveling to and from watering spots and to and from feeding areas. And in the middle areas, by the way, is a great big feeding area, and they all use that one, but there's feeding areas in different areas within each one of those doe's ranges. But anyway, the big buck now, what he's doing, he's following his scrape trails. And they aren't everywhere, like I said, they're just certain trails. But those trails enable him to get close to where those other bucks normally live, where he expects to find them, and run across their scents, their trail scents, which identify those other deer to this buck. Oh yeah, this is that one, that 2.5-year-old buck. Yeah, that's his odor. And, here's one of those darn pesky yearling bucks with just a little forky or maybe even spikes in this area. He's here, and I can smell where I'm downwind. Oh, he's right up this way, and he'll move in that direction to get close to him, and then he's going to charge him. Get out of here, and they go racing off. And most of these older bucks, once they've been run off, will stay off range until breeding is over. But some of them are maybe potentially dominant breeding bucks in the future, and they're aggressive now as well. You know, boy, I'm going to fight that big guy. I'm not going to let him chase me away. And they'll sneak back after they've been chased off. So during this week, he's got to chase some of these bucks off 2-3 times before they finally stay out of there. Except yearling bucks. The trouble with yearling bucks, he can chase one off, but that deer is still a young of a mature doe. And he's still dependent on that mature doe for direction and leadership in times of danger. And pretty soon, that yearling buck knows one of the worst dangers he's got to deal with from this time on during the next few weeks is that big dominant breeding buck. They know, here he comes again. He's going to chase me out of her. He's going to run out, but usually within the first day, sometimes two, but the first day, that yearling buck will sneak back to his mother. And so that big dominant buck, he's not done. He won't be done even until the end of the period when does breed during the next few weeks. He'll still have to contend with his yearling bucks sneaking back to their mother. So he's been spending a lot of time now renewing ground scrapes and sometimes antler rubs throughout this region. All these trails. Now that's a lot of trails that he has to manage. And in order to do that, he's not going to get much sleep for a while, not until this first phase of breeding is over. From now on, day and night, unless conditions are stormy or a real strong wind is blowing, or if he's discovered during the hunting season, there's a guy sitting in the tree right over here, and there's one over here. So I'm going to pass those up. When I come up here, I'm going to go around this way, up here, and to renew my ground scrapes and antler rubs until breeding begins. So right now, that's what he's doing. He's chasing out all these bucks, and he's being especially watchful. He knows the story too. It's the old game. Pretty soon there's going to be hunters in the woods, and I'm going to have to deal with them. And I got to be extra alert from this point on, looking for silhouettes of hunters in trees, looking for silhouettes of hunters climbing up into trees. I'm going to be listening to sounds that are characteristic of humans, and I'm going to smell them. No matter what the hunter is using to try to suppress smell, he's still going to smell. You might start out in the morning about as scent-free as you can be with all the stuff you can buy nowadays to become as scent-free as possible, but that's short-term protection. But within a few hours, you're going to have enough odor coming out of your clothing and coming out of the tops of your boots and things like that those bucks are going to be able to identify you by your odors alone. And then your trail sense too. When you walk into a stand site, and you'll probably be walking on one of those major deer trails to get there, and we do that. We mark the daylights out of well-used deer trails in our range, but usually in a circular fashion that goes around through the wide area there. And the rest of the area we never walk in during this deer season. except to go to a stand site. And we only use our stand sites one, sometimes 2 times a season. So these deer have all kinds of areas they can live without being bothered during the hunting season, which improves our odds of taking older bucks. That's one of the important things we do. But now, next week, about a week from today, our does are going to start being in heat. 10–12% of them, like I told you. Maybe what that means. Here we got how many does we got? We got 5 mature does and 3 yearling does in the area. That's 8 does in this area that are going to be in heat sometime between November 3rd and November 17th in our hunting. The dates might be a little different where you are, but that's going to be pretty close. Now, 8 of them over a 2-week period of time. That means some of them might be in estrus or in heat on the same day. That can happen too, but you know, once does are in this, it's not a big carnival out there with yearling does running around with big bucks trailing them all over the place. Within this area, there might be only 1 doe in heat on November 3rd. Maybe not till the 4th, or even the 5th. And then the next day, maybe there'll be 2. And there's going to be some days when there's none in heat in that square mile. So it's not what you're expecting. You know, like, oh boy, it's going to be really easy to take a big buck down there. All these does are in estrus out there, but that's not the way it works. Just a few at a time. Now, as long as you aren't hunting in an aggressive manner, all the deer are going to stand there during all those weeks ahead. But if you're making drives, of course, you can change all that. Chase not only the big bucks, but most other deer out of that area as well, very quickly. The guy likes to sneak, and he sneaks all over this mile, day 1 and day 2, looking for deer and not seeing any, wondering where all the deer are. He's emptying out every deer in the area is liable to leave that area for a while. Some of those older does, they know, well, I think we'll stay off range for a while, several days, 4 or 5 days, see how it goes from there. Some of the older bucks will never come back the rest of the hunting season. They're gone for the season, and you got an area devoid of deer. Maybe a couple fawns and some yearlings looking for mama, that kind of thing. But you won't see a lot of other deer in there, especially older bucks. But if you're stand hunters, if you are every hunter in this area, and usually we only have no more than about 2, sometimes 3 in a square mile. We're all stand hunters. They're going to stay there. And so we have a chance of seeing 20 deer. Not all of them today. Maybe we'll see 3 today, and the next day, oh, there goes a doe family. A doe with 2 fawns, for example, and a yearling. And there you see them going by, or whatever. But we keep things lively by being stand hunters. That's one of the great advantages of being a stand hunter. So all that's happening. Well, let's say it's November 3rd today. Now, by this time, all of the mature bucks that are 2.5 to 6.5 years of age that are not dominant, the bucks that this buck has chased off range won't be there. Won't that be strange? You might see some yearling bucks, but most of the others will be gone. But occasionally one might sneak by. Let's say this guy, when he leaves range, he only lives in a small little area right over here. Usually when they go off range, they don't live in a huge area, they live in a small area, bucks. And maybe 2 or 3 acres in size, and that's it. And he'll just stay there until breeding is over. And he'll know when breeding is over. He doesn't smell any more pheromones drifting in his way. And not all, it's time. It's the older bucks that have been through this, oh, now I can go home and I don't have to worry about that big dominant buck being rough on me. So most of them will be off range somewhere. Now, we have, us Nordbergs, you know, we've been at this a long time, and we know where a lot of places where these older bucks go during this period of the rut. And we take them there. Now, they're like bedding areas, most of them, off-range. We find their bedding areas, you know. The big beds, big droppings, big tracks in these different areas. But usually the dominant breeding buck is there, and boy, we know he beds there, but we don't go near that spot. We stay away from that spot, because if you chase him out of there during the hunting season, he's gone. He might only go up here somewhere and stay there. He might come back at night to take care of breeding, then go back up there, or he might just stay over there, and all these does that live here when they're in heat might have to go find him, which is easy to do. They can smell that buck a mile away, just like he can smell a doe in heat a mile away. Boy, that's that big buck. He's really stinking now. He's got tarsal musk all over his hind legs, and he urinates on hind legs to get that onto those ground scrapes, and so he also smells strongly of urine, and he smells strongly of that scalp musk flowing down the sides of his head and down onto his neck. Boy, that's him. Or I'm going up there. I'm in heat now, and I need to go to that buck, and they'll do that. And I've found places where I've seen as many as 11 deer. Well, I was 3 or 4 mature does with their young. You know, they had the whole gang along with them, except the yearling bucks. That big buck wouldn't tolerate having any yearling buck hanging around its mother while that mother's in heat. He'll chase that thing off, sometimes repeatedly on the day that doe is in heat. You know, each one in heat is only in heat for 24 to 26 hours. And those does that don't get bred during that first period of heat, they'll go into the heat again for the second phase of breeding, which begins about December 1st. And the final one starts a few days before January 1st, and it goes off for about 10 days into January. So anyway, so what you're going to find there opening morning is plenty of does with young, and even yearling bucks with them, or you'll see yearling bucks walking by there looking for mom. They want to get back to her on opening day. But where's all those big bucks? There didn't seem to be any big bucks in here. Well, they're hiding off range, keeping away from the big dominant breeding buck. But like I say, sometimes one of those bucks, particularly I think if he's destined to be a dominant breeding buck, now he's really aggressive, he's feeling really tough. I'm going to go back there anyway. And some of them, they'll locate that big buck with a doe in heat, and he'll be with a doe in heat almost every day, or searching for one. But he'll locate that big buck and a doe in heat fairly soon after he comes back, and knowing that he's in real trouble if the buck catches him, he'll try to stay out of their way, you know, not get in their way. He'll lay down near where they're feeding or whatever, and downwind, and watch them, looking for a chance maybe to sneak in. Maybe when that buck's chasing him out of the yearling way, he'll run in and breed the doe. That's what maybe that other big buck is thinking at that moment. So that can happen. So sometimes you can take a big dominant breeding buck on opening day, and the same day go to another spot. Here's another big buck. It's the second biggest buck in the hunting area, and or a previous dominant breeding buck that got beat up and chased around. So sometimes you can see a couple big bucks in an area like that. But if you do things right, if you always hunt within easy shooting range, well concealed, downwind or crosswind, wherever you find really fresh tracks or droppings, you know, shiny ones that are usually clumped at this time of year, of a big buck in or next to, let's say next to, you don't want to be walking around in feeding areas from this point on. When you're hunting, stay out of those feeding areas. If you have to go to the other side, always detour around them. I've said that before, but some guys get lucky and they'll go back and get a second buck, a big one, in the same area, the same day, or maybe 4 or 5 days later, or 8 days later, you know, and get dominant breeding bucks in 3 different areas in 1 square mile if you do it right. Well, John got 3 last year, but they were in separate, they were all in individual square miles. He got the big one in 3 square miles last year, and he's sitting there smiling at me. And I had to use my tag to tag his 3rd buck that he took last year, because I was the only person in the camp who still had an unused tag. And so my last day of trying to take that big buck I started out with on opening morning. Well, I warned him this year, he might be hanging next to those bucks behind our camp if he goes out and starts shooting more bucks this year. Well, anyway, back to this. So now you kind of know why things aren't quite the way you thought it was going to be. After all, gee, breeding is going on now. Good time to take a big buck. Well, another thing you'll notice after breeding begins, almost to the day, you know, usually, you know, like right now, if you go out there and into your hunting area, and if you were to scout the whole thing, you would notice that a whole bunch of those ground scrapes that you found earlier aren't being renewed. They look dead, there's snow on them, or there's leaves on them, it's all dull on the top. This thing hasn't been renewed for a long time. Why is that? Well, because it was made by one of those bucks got chased off range. You'll find that only on certain trails, and almost always within doe ranges. After all, this is where the big buck doesn't want other bucks to show up in doe ranges, particularly when a doe is in heat. So you'll only find fresh scrapes right now, today, for example, and tomorrow and the next day until next Tuesday or Wednesday. Those are maybe the only groundscapes that will be renewed. Well then, let's say it's the 5th of November and there's no fresh groundscapes being renewed because that big dominant buck no longer has time to be renewing groundscapes or searching for bucks that return prematurely. He's with does in heat now. That's his #1 concern. If he finds any antler bucks near that doe, he's going to chase them away, but not very far usually. He doesn't want to leave that doe alone very long when he's chasing another buck. He'll chase him maybe 50 to 100 yards, and that's in their race right back to the doe. But anyway, so, you know, you can see a buck, if you see a buck chasing another buck in the woods, you'll understand why that happened. This big buck is with a doe. Now, occasionally, when he's out here and say he's with a doe in estrus and he spots one of these other bucks that dare to return back, especially if it's mature, he's going to be pretty furious. And to demonstrate to that buck how furious he is, if there's a ground scrape very near where he and that doe in heat are in this, he'll go over and renew it. Boy, will he kick dirt and leaves way over there, 10, 15, 20 feet away from that ground scrape, and boy, he'll just massacre any branches that are overhanging that scrape as well. And so he's telling that buck over there that's waiting over there in the weeds, this is what's going to happen to you if you come any closer. And boy, you know, that can be a dynamite. Granted, let's say you're open, here it is, you're in the morning and you're heading out, and you come across, you're going to stand, let's say over here somewhere, and you come across a groundscape that's been looks like it's just been renewed, and look at it, all over the snow, and it's this black dirt and all that kind of thing. I've taken quite a few down the breeding bucks after discovering that. When I find one, I don't care where I was going to go. I'll back off downwind or crosswind and look around. You know, I'm out there in the morning going out there with my flashlight and look around. Oh man, there's a nice big spruce tree laying down. Let the wind blow it down. I'm going to go over there and it's downwind or crosswind, and I'm going to sit there. When I spot one of those kind of ground scrapes, up ahead that's just been renewed. I don't go up there to look at it. I get away from it, stay away from it. Don't put any trail scent there next to that thing. Get back downwind or crosswind right away. Sit down. I have taken big bucks that showed up. You know, when you find that, it means you're really close to the big dominant breeding buck and the doe he's with, and there's another buck close by. And so I've taken big bucks at such ground scrapes in November while breeding was going on several times, quite a few times now over the years. After all, I've been at this now for, this will be my 75th season, 76th season of deer hunting. So I've run across scrapes like that. In the old days, I didn't know what that meant, you know, a freshly renewed ground scrape. Breeding was going. I didn't even know breeding was going on in those early years. So, but that can be a dynamite place to sit. So keep that in mind. If no matter where you're going, if you find one like that in November, or you're going somewhere, start hunting there right now. Let's say you're going back to camp for lunch. You know, you can use this trail to go to your stand site. Now you're coming back. That ground scrape was not renewed when you went out there this morning. Boy, I tell you, rather than go have lunch, I'll back off downwind or crosswind, and I'll sit down where I'm well concealed. Remember, you're dealing, even though he's with a doe and he's still the best deer in the woods for identifying hunters, stand hunters, whether on the ground or up in the tree. Less likely on the ground if you got good concealment, but pretty hard to get good concealment in a tree when all the leaves are down. So you see that big dark silhouette up there against the sky. Oh no, I'm not fooled here. He'll probably give that doe a couple pokes with his antler, say, let's get out of here. There's a hunter over there, that kind of thing. So, but boy, that can be a good spot. So be on watch for that during this 2 weeks while breeding is going on. Well, what us Nordbergs do, we generally hunt adjacent to feeding areas. And why we hunt feeding areas? Because there's no place in the woods from dark to dark where you're more likely to see a buck, a big buck, than in a feeding area. A doe in feeding area, and a big buck will be with her and giving you a really good chance of taking a big buck. And gee, especially if you find his tracks and he's been dragging his hoofs from track to track, and gee, they're going up to this feeding area where you're planning to hunt. Boy, that's really exciting stuff to see when you're on your way to your stand site next to this feeding area. So, but we take most of our bucks at feeding areas. Now, when our season starts on the 7th, there might still be some deer eating green somewhere, but the ground is pretty well covered with snow up there now. And so I think all deer will be eating on browse. Usually they start about the 8th of the beginning of the second week in November. They start eating browse only. So we like feeding areas where there's a lot of browse during this coming hunting season. And we have plenty of stand sites picked out. A lot of them need no preparation at all. They're just really great natural cover with certain wind directions. You know, like, gee, it's from the east today. Oh man, I've got to hunt this spot on the west side of this really great browse area. That's where I'm going to go tomorrow morning, and that'll be where I'm going to go in the morning. So you'd be thinking that way. But I would say about 95% of the deer we take every year are in or adjacent to feeding areas. Bucks we take in or adjacent to feeding areas. But sometimes we take them at watering spots, but I'm not going to be too excited about watering spots now because all the ponds and lakes are frozen up there, so they're going to be eating snow. They can get their water anywhere by eating snow, and they do that all winter. So, but feeding areas are another thing. This is a place where they're going to be. Certain trail leading into it, that'd be a great spot. Here's a good, well-used trail. Geez, there's 4-inch tracks on that, or 1-inch shiny droppings, boy. And they went out in this feeding area. Well, let's say it's 11 o'clock and you're heading to camp and you find that kind of evidence. Well, they aren't feeding there now unless certain weather changes have occurred that trigger midday feeding, and you should know about that. You find out all about that in my book, my 10th edition. But anyway, then I'm going to head to camp. They aren't out there now, but unless that buck and doe has been alarmed by somebody, alarmed to the extent that they got to raise their tails and run somewhere, chances are excellent they're going to be back in that feeding area this evening. Now in our area, that's the last hour, legal shooting hour of the day. Our deer generally don't start feeding early in the afternoon because of the wolf situation. Our wolves hunt day and night there now. But anyway, but boy, wild horses couldn't keep me away from that feeding area later today, knowing what I know because of the tracks or deer signs I found. And but anyway, keep all that in mind. You know, if you did nothing else, but just stick to hunting feeding areas, maybe this is place around this big one day, and this the next, and this the next, and this next, depending on wind direction, of course. The odds of seeing a doe in heat in that area, trailed by the big Downwind buck who lives there or beds there in that area, are excellent. Sooner or later, if you're doing that, you're going to see that big Downwind buck with a doe in there, because there's all these does coming from different sides. They share this feeding area in between. And they'll feed in different areas, and sure, it's a great big feeding area. I mean, you can be sitting over here and not see any deer on that end, or up in that into this little area here. They can feed there day and night. So sometimes, if you don't see anything, well, next half day, go to another spot near a feeding area, or some other feeding area within there. And then keep in mind, there's small feeding areas within each one of those. And that's why during our hunting season, every day about 11 o'clock, we're at a standstill. I haven't seen anything here. I saw some does and young. On the way back to camp, I will walk on my cruise trail, the one that circle goes all through this area, close to feeding areas, looking for fresh tracks that tell me where those deer fed today, and whether or not that big buck was with that doe. And usually, you know, when you got snow, you see he's been dragging his tracks, so that buck is with that doe, and that doe is in heat. I guarantee you that. And as long as it's still in heat, which will only be 24 or 26 hours, you can hunt that feeding area where they went that afternoon or evening, and your odds for taking that big buck finally are excellent. Not 100%. Well, that doe, maybe it was in heat this morning, but now it's 26 hours or up, and so it's not in heat anymore, not interested in being bred. And so this buck is out looking for another doe in heat. So sometimes you're a day late and $1 short, but not out sooner or later. By sticking to places where does are feeding today, you're going to take a big buck. Speaking of in the afternoon, you know, we've learned over the years, my sons and I, that whitetails generally approach feeding areas from downwind. They're going to come in from downwind because they want to be sure that there's no humans or wolves out there where they're going to go and feed, where they're going to be especially visible, you know, over longer distances. They don't want to end up in a feeding area like that, so they'll come from downwind, and usually around most feeding areas like this one here, there's a trail inside all of these doe ranges that go right along the edge. It circles that feeding area. And you know, they might come from downwind to get there, and they'll get here, and they say, well, this is a big area, so they'll walk along that periphery trail over this way. No, don't smell anything there. Maybe I'll go up here and check. No, don't smell any there. Then they'll go back to where they started and then go out into that feeding area. But this year we're going to have plenty of snow the way it looks, so we'll be able to keep track where they're going and what they're doing. But let's say you're going out in the morning. You know, we change standstills every half day, but this could mean something to you, you know. If you come from downwind in the morning, the deer, they've already started feeding out there shortly after 4 a.m. They're out there in the dark feeding right now, and you're out there, you're just getting there about 5:30, 6 o'clock. It's still dark. First light isn't for another half hour. We always go an hour before sunrise every morning. And I've talked about that many times. But anyway, we're going along here. If you come from downwind, that's the best place to be in the morning. But think about this. When you went to that spot in the morning, you left trail scent. It's fresh. Your trail scent generally fades away within 4 days, unless it snows on top of or rains, that it can wash it away more quickly. But generally, it'll last 4 days. Now, if you went out there in the evening and the wind direction was from the same, and you went to your Stanford site in the evening, what's going to happen? Well, those deer coming from downwind, and to make sure they don't blunder into a hunter out here in this feeding area, are going to they're going to find your trail scent every time, and it was fresh. Yeah, and there he is. There's a hunter. Now he's not moving. Well, we don't worry much about hunters who don't move, stand hunters, but we aren't dumb either. So what we're going to do instead is go down way over this other end and feed over there. That's what we're going to do today. Now, because of that, we've kind of made it a rule. It's not hard and fast, but it's a good rule. If we're going to a stand site in the morning, we approach from downwind. That way, no deer in that feeding area is going to smell you coming. Yeah, and as long as they don't know what you are that's coming, you might hear a footstep now and then if you're walking softly. And if you're not stopping off, that can be kind of scary to a deer over there. Oh, he's stopping off and he's hunting. And they'll go away. You can't fool them into thinking you're a feeding deer because you don't make the same sound. You aren't chewing on browse loudly enough to being heard. No, you're not fooling them. So anyway, if they don't know what you are, they're not going to run away, but they might be suspicious for a while, and usually they'll kind of stop, they'll watch and listen, and if they don't hear or see anything in the next 30 minutes, well, whatever it was, it's gone, or it's not dangerous, so they'll start feeding again. So that's why we get there a little earlier. But anyway, but in the afternoon, if you intend to go back to that same stand site the same day, it is a lot better to hunt from crosswind in the evening. Now, when you hunt crosswind, instead of, let's say the wind is blowing in this direction, when you hunt crosswind, it kind of, let's say you get over here and hunt in this area, those deer coming from downwind over here in this area, they aren't going to smell you. They'll smell your trail scent. That might be spooky, but they can tell how long ago you made that trail scent. They can sniff that, and if that's an older scent, it's older than a half day, for example. You came back at noon, and that's the last time you put trail scent on train, the deer coming from downwind. Well, that's not fresh, so that means he's not here right now. And you can't smell him up ahead, so it's safe to come in there. But while they're doing that, you're over here, and they come out in front of you. All of a sudden, your odds of taking that deer later in the day are going to be much better than sticking to downwind at that same feeding area that day. So we say, well, it's downwind in the morning, crosswind in the afternoon. That's the way we do it, and it pays off. Not every day it doesn't pay. Heck, we're still dealing with the smartest buck in the area, the one that's best more than any else. And he proved it already by being big. He lived a long time. Well, how did he live a long time? By being very good at finding hunters, whether you're stand hunters or making drives or still hunters, guys that sneak, wander randomly. No matter what you do, your odds of being detected by that buck before you even really realize it's near are excellent. But as long as you keep taking the proper precautions, eventually, sooner or later, that buck is going to be there in front of you and not realize you're there, a big, unsuspecting buck within easy shooting range. That's what you want. So, now, after all this, how are you going to remember all this, huh? Get your book, and you'll find it all in there. You'll find about 30 precautions you should take when you're hunting big bucks. You'll find about 8 ways to know whether this stand site you selected would give you good odds for taking a big buck. How's that? No, you just don't hunt randomly for, oh, I like this spot for no particular reason, and I put a stand in that tree, or decide to hunt on the ground sitting on a stool like I do over there. You got to have good reasons for being there every time, otherwise you're wasting your time trying to take a big buck. You always want to be close to wherever a big buck is right now, or will be later today. And so, if you're not doing that, you're not much of a buck hunter. Isn't that sad? You have to change everything. And how, and when, and, you know, we have we now have 7 different ways to hunt, to stand hunt. You know, we don't stand hunt like you do, or anybody else in America. We stand hunt quite differently from everybody else. And our stand hunting is mature buck effective, meaning our odds of taking big bucks wherever we sit in the woods are always really good. And despite the fact that that buck that we're trying to get is the smartest buck in the woods, and they give you a clinic on how to stay away from hunters, eventually he's likely to fail to get you in time. He's likely to fail before you got your scope on him, on his neck, or maybe a hump shot, eye shot, or a chest shot, heart lung shot, whatever. You got your scope on now, and he doesn't even know you're there. That's what's going to happen. So, otherwise you may never have a chance like that. Most of the time, oh boy, look at that big buck running, oh man, he's going pow, 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 you empty your gun. You try that at a range, you know. Take your semi-auto out in the range and stand there, standing shot, offhand shot, and empty your gun at that target, and then check your target and see how well you did at 100 yards, say. Try that. It can be really some eye-opener. And if that's what you're doing, it's time you change so that all your shots at big bucks are at standing or slowly moving bucks only 50 yards away. Okay? You can make that into the best buck hunting square mile you ever had if you do things properly. So, and get one out of there every year. How about that? Without really doing any damage to the total population. Every year you'll probably have about the same number of deer, unless you're in wolf country. But anyway, that's the way you should be doing it this year. Okay, gang? And to make sure you haven't forgotten everything I told you this morning, get your book, and best investment you ever made for buck hunting. Believe me, and you'll agree. Soon. Okay, guys, thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. See, you know, I got almost 1,100,000 visits on this YouTube channel. That's a lot of deer hunters been watching me. And how are you all going to remember all this stuff? Geez, look at how many YouTube seminars I've made over the last year and a half. How are you going to remember all that stuff? Yeah, you know, you're going to be sitting there saying, geez, Dr. never talked about this. And you're trying to remember what to do. If you got your book, oh yeah, it's in here. Here's the table of contents. And yeah, go to that chapter, you'll find it. Okay, then also, hit that thumbs up button, would you? And that it's a favor to me. That and subscribing. Now, it doesn't cost you anything. And it gives you some advantages, but it means everything to me, guys, please. And it's my future in this business of providing good hunting seminars to you guys in the future. So with that, best of luck this year, you guys. Get a big one. Okay, send me a photo on the internet and let me see what you got. I'd be really excited to see it. And for the rest of you that didn't get one, get your book and find out why you didn't get it. You're going to be kicking yourself. Oh, I did this and I did that, and that's no wonder I didn't get that big buck this year. Okay, well, see you, and thanks for watching again, and I'll see you again soon. Be sure to visit my website. Here's the link. Here you'll find links to my blog posts, my Twitter account, my YouTube account, my Amazon store with links to my ebooks, my son's eBay store, a money saver if you're ordering from Canada or other countries, my website bookstore, and much more.